Not yet.
Now we're live. Okay. When one wasn't watching, I'm sorry. We didn't know we were in live. Okay. We didn't do last week, so we're going back 2 weeks ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going back, and I'm pretty sure we're at chapter 5, right?
The beginning. I think we just did the first portion of chapter 5.
Mm-hmm.
Which
So
I think the first portion of I think just the first portion where we spoke about, we gave just thinking for a second, chapter 5. We were talking about, you're opening up in the meantime, the
Yep, here we go.
Amazing, yeah. So ups, I hope you're doing well. Harris, wouldn't it have been like more beneficial if just people were doing like this stream at ARC? I don't know. I feel like that would be like people would enjoy that a little more. But we spoke about sort of the difference between Jacobim Mugatu. Wow.
What happened? This was scheduled for next week.
It was a mistake, I guess. When I pushed it off last week.
Really?
I told Jacob we were streaming, and he said he was very astute. And he said that he realized that I scheduled it for next week. But we're here now. So we spoke a little about, if I'm just doing a little recap, one goal, multiple goals, just two goals. We said how two goals end up splitting someone, and there's one lofty goal. And we spoke about how all those goals, like the loftier the goal, the umbrella includes more things in it, right? If I'm just a fisherman, there's only certain things I'm going to focus on. But if my goal, right, if my summit, if the top of Mount Everest is God, right, on my way up, I'm going to get to all these little summits as well along the way. And we spoke about how do we, choosing this right goal. We spoke about, I think I mentioned the idea of a tachon and tanu, right? The idea of, we talk about medubakim be'yiratecha. We should be glued in awe of you and in fear of you. And the idea of gluing over there is basically like all these different experiments are all glued together and become one experience, one unified purpose ultimately. And I think Rav Kook talks about how that reverence of Hashem unifies our days ultimately, right? If we're looking at things all through like this continuum. And I think we gave the idea also of how we spoke about that while I have this one goal, right? That's not to say that, and in this one goal that encapsulates all things, you could come and say like, well, what do you mean, Chezi? What about problematic things, right? So then we come and gave the example of Yilta, right, from the Gemara, and how she wanted to experience all things, and I wanted blood, so you could have liver, and I have marrow prohibitions, and we have yibum, and showed that the Torah actually gives all aspects and allows people to experience everything in this world in the proper context and in the proper orientation, right? Lastly, she asks to have meat and milk together, and her husband barbecues for her cow udders, and by that she has the udders, which is milk, and she's getting the cow. And that was like the idea of Yilta. And then we got into the idea of, can you just scroll down for a second? You're opening it. And we ended at Vezot Ada Tachlit, right? Right. We spoke about the drinking, and we spoke about also the B'riyut Haguf over here as well. And how the mitzvot are there also, of course, to refine us and prepare us for deeper understanding as well. And I think we also spoke about the idea, all right, of course, ultimately, according to the Rambam, all of this is so I could better comprehend and have my apprehension of Hashem, of God ultimately as well. And this is what I want to be. This is, right, full comprehension of God is obviously impossible, right? But this has to go with our little summits, right? We're trying to attain knowledge, each according to his own capacity, ultimately, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because also we're talking about the in the parasha we're talking about the Mishkan and the Bet Mikdash, and obviously there's a great idea. I don't know if it's particular to Chabad, but I think it's most famous there. Maybe of like Shachanti betocham, I would dwell within them.
Yep.
And so it makes me always think about, and it kind of relates to what the Rambam says here about the vessel needs to be.
I just want to point out to anyone hearing, you're talking about V'shachanti betocham. God is talking about inhabiting the tabernacle, yet he's speaking in plural, and we say from that, and the tabernacle is singular, and the idea is that it's not only that he's inside the tabernacle, rather the tabernacle is all of us, right? God is in us. Sorry, please go ahead. It's just
Right.
It's a beautiful teaching.
Yeah, and so just like the temple, it needs to be made of particular materials, and you can't put into, and the sacrifices need to be of a certain degree or a certain kind, that they can't have blemishes and all those kind of things. Also, if we think of ourselves as a mishkan, as a dwelling place, as a vessel, like the Rambam talks about it, it also needs to be thought about, okay, we need to have it complete, it needs to be healthy, it needs to be this, right? So all of this is kind of like beautifully, I think, connects.
Yeah, and I think it's a good, before we go on to the next part, I think it's a good example of Meshachanti betocham, right? There's this, God wants an achdut, right? Achdut Hashem, or yichud Hashem, which is unity, harmony, integrating different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is unlike uniformity, achidut, right? And we gave the example of Allah Akbar, right? God is above all, right? Which requires submission from us. And the Torah's idea of Hashem Echad, right? God encompasses all, right? And those are differences, right? We are unifying in the words of the in Chassidut, the nigudim, right? We're taking all these things together, and they all obviously find place in God. And this also relates to the idea of, even if I have one goal, right? Each human is different, right? The idea is obviously God is infinite, and each person, even though it's a unified goal, could still find his own sense of expression and individuality within his own journey up the mountain towards his relationship with the master of the universe. I'll just end with the idea that we always say in Tfilat Amidah, right? When I pray, I say, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. Jacob has been having a very robust conversation about Tfilat Amidah and how it, of course, it predates what the Christians are playing around with, but just how, whatever, it's a side conversation. But the point is, even there when we daven, we say, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. Why three different gods, right? Why can't we just say the God of
Votenu.
Of Avotenu, exactly, because each one had his own unique relationship with God. There's the God of Isaac, and as we of course know, God tells Moses that while I introduce myself to you under the Tetragrammaton, right, that was not the case with Abraham. It was under the name of El Shaddai, Meshaded Marachot, or whatever. That's a whole other limud. But let's continue on.
Let's do it.
Jacob, you have any comments, complaints?
I was just gonna say, so Shachanti betocham is Rashi, who says that from the midrash. So yeah, it's pretty widely said, and yeah.
Okay. No.
Where do we stop off?
So did we stop off here too? Because we talked about the Tachlit.
No, I think we continued. Yeah, we continued till the Tachlitahi. I think we stopped in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. There. One second. Yes, okay. I'll read the Hebrew.
Go for it. I'll do the English.
Okay.
Jacob can do the Farsi.
ועל היקש זה, ועל ההיקש, sorry. ועל ההיקש לא תהיה עד כוונתו אלא הנאה לבד, עד שיבחר מן המזון והמשתה הערב, וכן בשאר הנהגתו, אבל יכוון אל המועיל, וכשיזדמן שיהיה ערב, יהיה, וכשיזדמן שיהיה בלתי ערב, יהיה, או יכוון אל הערב על דרך חוכמת הרפואה, כמי שחלשה תאוותו למאכל. יאירה במזונות המטובלים הערבים שנפש האדם מתאווה להם. וכן מי שהתעוררה עליו מראה שחורה יסירה בשמיעת, this is crazy Rambam, beautiful Rambam, בשמיעת הניגונים ובמיני הזמר ובטיול הגנות בבניינים הנאים וחברת הצורות היפות וכיוצא בהם במה שיחיב הנפש. ויסיר חולי המראה השחורה ממנו, והכוונה בזה שיבריא גופו, הכוונה בזה ויביא גופו לקנות חוכמה, וכן שיתעסק לקנות ממון, תהיה תכלית כוונתו בקיבוצו.
Okay, sorry. Here.
תכלית כוונתו בקיבוצו, שיוציא במעלות ושימצאו לחושי גופו להמשיך מציאותו, עד שישיג וידע מהשם יתברך, מה שאפשר לדעתו. Crazy Rambam.
Okay.
Why crazy?
Well, tough. We'll get into it.
So we are accordingly, maybe?
Yeah.
Accordingly, man will not direct his attention merely to obtain bodily enjoyment, choosing of food and drink and the other things of life, only the agreeable, but he will seek out the most useful, being indifferent to whether it is agreeable or not. There are indeed times when the agreeable may be used from a curative point of view, as for instance, when one suffers from loss of appetite, it may be stirred up by highly seasoned delicacies and agreeable, palatable food. Similarly, one who suffers from melancholy may rid himself of it by listening to singing and all kinds of instrumental music, by strolling through beautiful gardens and splendid buildings, by gazing upon beautiful pictures and other things that enliven the mind and dissipate gloomy moods. The purpose of all of this is to restore the healthful condition of the body, but the real object in maintaining the body in good health is to acquire wisdom. Likewise, in the pursuit of wealth, the main design in its acquisition should be to expand it for noble purposes and to employ it for the maintenance of the body and the preservation of life, so that its owner may obtain a knowledge of God insofar as it is vouchsafed unto man.
Okay, so first off, like we were talking about this unified goal I have, right? And I have to ask, okay, so now that I have this unified goal, right, everything is aimed towards God ultimately, does that mean I need to really consider every single action I take? Like, this raisin brand, how is this related to God? And I mean, the answer is yes, because when we put on our shoes, socks or shoes, we put it already in a specific order, right? But one would ask, am I really supposed to think about all these things? Now, the answer is yes, but as you do these things all the time, they become instinctive, right? They become sort of second nature. So why it would seem like it's going to be so difficult to me to have this mindfulness app all the time about every decision I make, assuming you live a observant life, right? A lot of these things become second nature for you. And whether you're not living an observant life, I'm just saying all the kind of things that you, at some point, you keep on doing as part of your general repertoire, right? You get used to these things. Now, but before we dive again into what he was saying, we mentioned this in one of the earlier chapters. And while we're reading the Rambam, I just want to contrast this, right, to again, the idea of Kedusha with regards to Maimonides and the Ramchal, right? With how they see these things, right? So according to, and all these goals that Rambam is talking about over here, right? It's ultimately, this is like a balance, right? I need to get like this physical place and this emotional place, which allows me to get to like this higher wisdom. And the Ramchal talks about different stages. There's the Chassid, but eventually he talks about the Kadosh. And the Kadosh is because the Chassid really stays away from everything, right? This is why it relates to the essence. He's fast. He does more sigufim, which he spoke about in chapter number 4, that Rambam says, like, one should be very careful about that. But the Kadosh, according to the Ramchal, that's someone that is like deeply connected and fully embraces everything, right? As in, he got to the place of the Chassid. He realized at some point that like he no longer needs to refrain from doing certain things to get to a higher level, Rather, he could fully embrace all aspects of life and live that higher level, right? So that's according to the Kadosh, and that's sort of part of the experience, is that I'm taking on all these things. It's not a means to an end. Either doing these things themselves are part of the experience. Again, so this is very different.
Bringing holiness, right? Kadosh, in terms of like bringing holiness to everything, right? Something like that.
Yes, there's this idea. If you look at the psukim of Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau, right before the whole blessing mix-up. So Isaac is using words about the food. He tells Esau to get a kasher hafti, right? Make the foods that I love. Like he's talking about this is a very physical thing. And he talks about emshoch bni, right? That I'm going to pull him. And hakol kol Yaakov, right? The sound is like Jacob. And reach b'gadav, the smell of his clothing. So you can see over here that Isaac is fully, and we believe, of course, that Isaac is, one of the patriarchs. And of course, he's experiencing life in a very divine way. But if we read these verses over here, we see the way he's experiencing it, the taste of the food. Kasher hafti, right? Food that I actually loved. We can see it's not just something that you eat for no reason, or according to the Ramchal, the way he would read these psukim is like loving these things and experiencing things and smelling your son and hugging your son. These are all part of the experience, right? These are not just to get to wisdom, but this is, of course, what we want. As we always try to do over here, try to make a synthesis between them. Or like, how do we see that Ramchal and the Rambam are actually speaking the same language? I'll just mention that, again, in the guide to the perplex, in the Moreh, the guide, right? Rambam talks about how only Moshe and the patriarchs reached this ultimate level of dvekut, right? How do you say dvekut in English, Jacob? Cleaving to God, right? So I always mix it up with clinging, but we're not being clingy with God. We're just cleaving to God.
Well, no, it is clinging. It's the same thing. Davek literally, I mean, in modern Hebrew, it's glue, right?
Mm-hmm.
But davekut is, we attach ourselves to God.
Right. So Rambam, in a classic Rambam move, says, why is Moses the ultimate person with dvekut, with clinging to God? Because it's Moses, right? Moses is the OG. I don't even have to explain it anymore because we know Rambam is obviously in Moses' corner, and that's understood why. But then we have asked about the patriarchs, right? They're clearly not in Moses' level. So how are we saying they reached this dvekut? So the Rambam, the guide to the perplex, and Jacob and I have spoken about this in the past about digging wells or maaseh avot siman lebanim, right? These are the archetypes. Rambam talks about that the patriarchs, all their existence, while they were being sheep herders, while they're talking, all of it was in essence aimed towards God, right? When we speak about that, the tefillot, avot tiknum, right? That the prayers were already set up by the forefathers. We know they're not saying word to word what we say today. However, they were experiencing prayer, right? And that's what was happening. So the Rambam also says that by, when Isaac or Abraham are even putting on their shoes or picking their tunic for the morning, already in that act, they're already doing dvekut leHashem, right? So, and this goes back to what we were saying about going back to this portion we read right now, that when the Rambam gives all these examples, and we could ask, how can I actually manifest in each one of these things my cleaving to God? The attitude is, if you're in the right mindset and you're being mindful, then of course these things are possible.
Right. So, I mean, is there any difference here? Because, I mean, the Rambam also says, yes, I mean, obviously you need to partake of different foods. I guess the emphasis that he puts here is whether it's palatable
here in the guide or here in the Mishnah, in the Shemona Prakim, or in the guide.
Here in the Shemona Prakim, right?
The Shemona Prakim, Rambam he's more like eat food. Again, we're going to see, because he talks later on in the portion, he talks about the aesthetic as well, but.
Right, but he says eat food, eat what you need, but he makes a distinction here for, I don't know if this is the right term, even though it sounds right, but like preservation. I'm thinking of preservation of energy, or using only the amount of force that you need, right? So it seems like he's saying something to the extent of, you don't need to put spices on the food if you can just eat it and then do your thing completely, fully, But if you need the salt or whatever, then go for it. Like if it's needed for you, then you can do it. But there seems to be that's the kind of distinction.
Jacob, 1 second. I would agree with you. That is the difference. That's what he sounds here. When I bring the Ramchal, and I gave the idea of the psukim from Jacob and Esau and Isaac, where he says kasher ahavti, right? That's not language that Rambam's using. Like, what do you mean the food I loved? What does that mean? Like, now the idea is in the guide, Rambam then does admit that no, the forefathers, the patriarchs, were actually fully experiencing their connection to God in all aspects of life, right? They were Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah, I just want to like point to the paradox here, right? Because in one case, it sounds like the Rambam says, eat the food that you need, and if you need the spices, do it, which sounds like a compromise. Sounds like you're going down. But then in a sense, we, like you say, he says in the More, and what the Ramchal says, actually putting the spices could be a higher level than not putting the spices, because you're elevating the spices as well.
The key word you're looking for here is mo'il, right? What she talks about over here. He's like mashe mo'il, right? Mm-hmm. So it's what's going to be beneficial, right? That's what you're prioritizing. So that health, even, or the food, is not the means. Is the means. It's not the end, right? Yeah. And so the way you should read the Rambam here is don't overindulge, don't put on the spices. Because I foolishly am trying to integrate the Ramchal, am jumping to the guide to the perplexed to show that the Rambam himself also agrees with this.
So we started sort of discussing this earlier, which was people were asking about psychedelics and Orthodox rabbis. Mm-hmm. And Rabbi Breitowitz quite famously has said they have their place, and which caused a lot of people to lose their mind. And somebody, I forget who it was, said, well, didn't the Rebbe say something similar? Yeah, guess what? Judaism teaches Kol Rahmana Avid Latav Avid. Everything that has been created has been created.
We lost Jacob, but he was giving us some of his. We lost you. Kol.
Kol Rahmana Avid Latav Avid. Right? That everything that God has created, He has created for His reasons, and so. Everything has a reason for it. Everything has and I think ultimately the question becomes, is this the proper time for the proper thing, right? I think the Talmud calls Torah Sam, right? It says
Samachayim, yes.
Samachayim, but for the wrong purpose, it's Sam Hamavet, right? It's a medicine.
Sam and I were talking about this on a more far out there topic, but we were talking about how, if according to Rav Kook, advancements of technology with regards to, let's say, longevity or whatever could potentially be interpreted as, Tchiyat HaMetim, that only works if the ideas around that and the people that are dealing with that are properly oriented, right? If you're a Silicon Valley bro, then you're dealing with necromancy, and then it's something horrible, right? It could be Samachayim, it could be Samamavet. It really depends, the proper orientation of this thing. I'm trying to think if we should dive into this right now about Binyanim and Na'im. Why I was saying it's sort of like crazy in a certain sense, because, right, Rambam is almost like, in a certain sense, he's addressing over here Marash Chora. He's addressing depression already, right? He's saying if someone's going to be over here in this, right? I just explained right now that you should create this balance and don't overindulge yourself. Having said all that, right? Now I'm dealing with someone that is depressed. So he gives these crazy options over here, right? He says, go listen to music, go take a walk, go look at beautiful architecture, right? So there's a sense where the Rambam here is sort of saying, like, yes, you could also connect through these things if necessary. And the reason I said it was crazy, Jacob, is because Rambam is known, there's a prohibition since the destruction of the temple not to listen to live music. And Rambam was very, very strict about this. Most rabbis decided to be like, no, you could listen to music. However, there are certain periods of time where we don't listen to music because of the destruction. But the reason these rabbis still mention not listening to live music during these periods is back to Maimonides, right? That's their source. And taking that into consideration, Rambam then, of course, says, though, he's like, never listen to music live because of the destruction unless you're depressed, right? And then, of course, you should be listening to music because then there's a different route. And this is always important to remember about halacha, and going back to the Yota thing. The Torah says about many things no, and then and Jacob talks about this very often, which is you might ask a rabbi and he says no, and someone else asks him and the rabbi says yes, because there's different circumstances and there's different reasons, and he knows you. And so these are also, in many times, very personal relationships we have with the master of the universe. And of course, Maimonides manages in his wisdom to show us how to create that balance. Let's continue reading.
Why don't you answer Upcycle Club?
Sure. I didn't see the question. 1 second. 1 second.
Read it out loud.
Here we go. So, is it safe to say that the intellectual and moral virtues that the Rambam elaborates on here are the essential components of Chokhmah? The way the Rambam talks about it, yes. I mean, Chokhmah is also like, we're using it in Maimonides terms, right? We're not looking at Chokhmah right now from like a mystical tradition, but yes, so that would make sense. Ultimately, again, remember where we're reading in the Shemona Prakim, this connects back to the nefesh, to the life force, and the life force experiencing Chokhmah together returns back to part of the divine intellect. And as we gave an example, all we have is a little droplet, right? Which is mirroring a little of from the divine. And the goal is to do everything we can to orient ourselves towards that, so we could fully refine that element of ours, of our wisdom, so then we could best understand and apprehend God in its limited form. And if we do that successfully in the world to come, right, according to Maimonides, we are in the closer ring, right? We are experiencing more of the radiance because we've created a vessel that could accept more of the radiance. Unlike the Kabbalists, which will say, if Maimonides says you have this divine spark, but you could squander it, right? If you don't expand the vessel, when you die, it's lights out. The Kabbalists will come and say, even if you, at some point, you're tethered to eternity. So there's always a connection to eternity. Jacob, do you want to add something?
I mean, I've barely read through the Shemona Prakim. I would just say I think Rambam in general wouldn't say anything is an essential component of Chokhmah, and that's why I wanted you to answer it.
Why would you say he's not saying anything is an essential component of Chokhmah?
Because he would say that whatever is necessary to get there is necessary to get there, but like that you have to. I'm not sure like which intellectual and moral virtues exactly are you talking about. I think what he's saying, as best I can tell, is there is like knowledge of God, which we strive towards, and each person has to do that which is necessary in order to get himself towards that. And so I didn't like the point of like, these are essential components.
Okay, I get you. However, as we see when we're going to move on right now, Rambam does delineate between metaphysics and medicine to carpentry and other things, because he says, while you could use, let's get into it. Are we in the next spot?
Yeah.
Okay. ועל היקש, ועל זה ההיקש יש למלאכת הרפואות מבוא גדול מאוד במעלות השכליות, בעמידות ובידיעת השם יתברך. Right? So here he's giving it there's a hierarchy to these things. ובהגיע להצלחה האמיתית, ויהיה לימודיה ובקשתה עבודה מן העבודות הגדולות, ולא תהיה אז כהריגה וכנגרות. כי בה נשאר פעולותינו וישוב פעולות אנושיות מביאות אל מעלות האמיתיות. כי האדם שיבוא ויאכל מזון ערב אל החך, טוב הריח שנפש האדם מתהווה לו, והוא מזיק לו. ואפשר שיהיה סיבה לחולי קשה או למיתת פתאום, זה ובהמות אצלי שווים. ואין זה פועל האדם, מאשר הוא אדם בעל שכל. אמנם הוא פועל אדם מאשר הוא חי, נמשל כבהמות נדמו, where we see in תהילים, ואומנם יהיה פועל אנושי כשיאכל המועיל לבד, ופעמים יניח הערב ויאכל הנמאס, כפי בקשת המועיל. וזה פועל לפי הדעת, ובזה נבדל האדם בפעולת מזולתו. וכן כשיתהווה, one second. Can you scroll down? It looks like stuck on my screen. Oh, sorry. מבלי שישמור הנזק והתועלת, יש לו זה הפועל מאשר הוא בעל חי, לא מאשר הוא אדם. ואפשר שתהיה הנהגתו כולה לפי המועיל, כפי שהזכרנו, אלא שישים התכלית, בריאות גופו ושלמותו מהחולים לבד, ואין זה חסיד. כי כמו שבחר זה הנעת הבריאות, בחר זה האחר הנעת המאכל, right? He chose this, או הנעת המשגל, וכולם אין תכלית אמיתית לפעולתם. אבל נכון שישים, does that make sense?
אבל נכון שישים תכלית, אבל הנכון, the right way.
שישים תכלית כל מה שיתעסק בו, בבריאות גופו והמשך מציאות על השלמות, כדי שישארו כלי כוחות נפשו, אשר הם איברי הגוף שלמים, ותתעסק נפשו מבלי מונע במעלות המידות ובמעלות השכליות, וכן כל מה שילמדו מן החוכמות ומן הדעות שישיג. Okay. Take it away.
Okay. From this point of view, the study of medicine has a very great influence upon the acquisition of the virtues and of the knowledge of God, as well upon the attainment of true spiritual happiness. Therefore, its study and acquisition are preeminently important religious activities and must not be ranked in the same class with the art of weaving or the science of architecture, for by it one learns to weigh one's deeds, and thereby human activities are rendered true virtues. The man who insists upon indulging in savory, sweet-smelling, and palatable food, although it be injurious, and possibly may lead to serious illness or a sudden death, ought, in my opinion, to be classed with the beasts. His conduct is not that of a man insofar as he is a being endowed with understanding, but it is rather the action of a man insofar as he is a member of the animal kingdom. And so he is like the beasts who perish, from quoting from Psalms. Man acts like a human being only when he eats that which is wholesome, at times avoiding the agreeable and partaking of the disagreeable in his search for the beneficial. Such conduct is in accordance with the dictates of reason, and by these acts man is distinguished from all other beings. Similarly, if a man satisfies his sexual passions whenever he has the desire, regardless of good or ill effects, he acts as a brute and not as a man. It is possible, however, for one to shape one's conduct entirely from the point of view of utility, as we have stated, with no aim beyond that of maintaining the health of the body or guarding against disease. Such a man does not deserve to be called virtuous, for just as he strives for the enjoyment of good health, another like him may have as his aim the gratification of eating or of sexual intercourse, none of which action leads towards the true goal. The real duty of man is that in adopting whatever measures he may partake for his well-being and the preservation of his existence in good health, he should do so with the object of maintaining a perfect condition of the instruments of the soul, which are the limbs of the body, so that his soul may be unhampered and he may busy himself in acquiring the moral and mental virtues. So it is with all the sciences and knowledge man may learn.
So this answers, and this is what I was talking about, Jacob, which answers Harris's question, which is, yes, assuming everything's done with proper orientation, all the things you do if you need to, Rambam says, right? If you need to listen to music, you need to go swimming, you need to dance, you need to this, you need to that, great. Okay, but of course, doing those things are all secondary and only if you need to, and they must be aimed towards God. However, Maimonides, aside from him being, right, his bias being a doctor, his attitude is, and we said this in the earlier chapter, how metaphysics and physics, by studying them, you are literally studying also understanding God's knowledge, right? So that's at one level. And then in medicine, by taking care of your body, right? And you could add in medicine also sort of, I would say in today's day and age, like also mental health, psychology, is knowing how to know myself and create a better balance. So that should also would be closer towards the chokhmah, because that is allowing me sort of to look at the world. Everything at that point, everything from that point on, of course, could be done, right? But like the Rambam says over here, if I decide to eat just because I want to go to an all-you-can-eat, then I'm obviously not orienting that properly. If I decided to get the all-you-can-eat so I could have all the people over at the celebration of the Siyam HaShas that I'm going to have, and because it's all-you-can-eat, everyone can eat right now, I used that and I oriented it properly. So that's just my point about Jacob, and it's not clear how Harris said it over here. So that to say that the intellectual and moral virtues that the Rambam elaborates on here are the essential components. So I would say the metaphysics, physics, sciences, medicines, those are the essential components. And I would say everything else on top of that could be added. And if oriented properly, also become, I don't know if they become essential, but they become a tool. Jacob, your thoughts on this?
I hear you.
You hear me. All right. Hemshachnu.
Yep.
Sorry, that was rude of me. Ben.
No, I don't have anything. I'm trying to think. I don't have anything useful to say, I don't think. Seems pretty straightforward for now.
I mean, I think we would agree, and I mean, again, Rambam sort of, when we're reading this, we're sort of reading laboratory conditions, right? Which is like, you're talking to that guy who's the Rambam, who's also a doctor, right? So you have to ask yourself, like, how much room could he have given the artists, right? And that's not to say that an artist or someone composing music is not reaching some sort of divine level of connection and he's connecting through it. But I would say, generally speaking, right, you would agree, I think, that there's a difference between me reading a book about plaster, right, and how quickly it dries, to me reading a book about Schrodinger's cat, are going to lead towards different understandings of the world and appreciation of God.
Yeah, so what I'm getting from this is actually, maybe it's slightly different, or maybe I'm just thinking in different metaphors or examples to make this too political, but this is like bureaucracy. This is you have bureaucracy on one side, and then you have a functioning system on the other side, right? So the system might have your goal needs to be higher than the system, right? It needs to be higher than the body itself. The body is a tool for something specific. So yes, you need to maintain the body to an extent, but the goal of maintaining the body is towards that higher goal, right? Which is what you mentioned, Chezi, right? It encompasses, it's the top level. Otherwise, the goals of the system itself can, in a sense, just go into this feedback loop that creates whatever bureaucracy, cancer, whatever it might be, addiction, all those different things that you can call it, that just optimizes itself without considering the complete ecosystem. So this is to me, that's kind of like what I see him pointing out here, right?
Right. And the idea is, right, the more lofty the goal, right, the umbrella covers more things, which should be, it should be easier for you, right? If the goal is God, right, then I could even bring Jenga, right? I could somehow connect Jenga, playing with my son. I'm connecting it back to the God. Now,
not only that you can bring things that you might not have considered, but also that whatever you bring is oriented not to its own demise, but is oriented towards something that's actually going to move it in a good direction, or in a lively direction, because otherwise it will just loop around itself, like I said.
Right, but that my point was, so now I take music, I would just say these are all the little summits, right? Which is like, I could get to a point where music could get me this far, right? Then it becomes a problem if I just stay there and I'm looping into there, like you're saying right now. But it is okay for me to be aware that there are other summits along the way. And if I get them through different routes, right? It's not like I get to the top only through metaphysics and that's the only thing I could study, right? Okay, let's continue. Weiter. Scroll down. Mashu. מהן דרך לתכלית ההיא, אין בו דין ודברים, ומה שאין בו תועלת לתכלית ההיא, כשאלת החשבון, וספר החירותים והתחבולות, ולהרבות משאלות אל ההנדסה, ומשיכת המשקלים, והרבה כיוצא באלו, תהיה הכוונה בהם לחדד השכל, ולהרגיל כוח השכלי בדרכי המופת, עד שיגיע לו אדם קניין ידיעת ההיקש המופתי מזולתו, ויהיה לו זה הדרך שיגיע בו לידיעת אמיתת מציאות השם יתברך.
Should we continue or?
No, do that. It's up there.
Concerning those which lead directly to this goal, there is naturally no question. But such subjects such as mathematics, the study of conic sections, mechanics, the problems of geometry, hydraulics, and many others of a similar nature, which do not tend directly towards that goal, those should be studied for the purpose of sharpening the mind and training the mental faculties by scientific investigations, so that man may acquire intellectual ability to distinguish demonstrative proofs from others, whereby he will be enabled to comprehend the essence of God.
Right. So I would just mention over here. So like, you could be the best scientist in the world, right? Again, as far as Maimonides, all that's a means to an end, right? Because like, it's great that you cure cancer, but ideally by doing so, you also understood more about the world and more about logic. And now you can understand God better, ultimately, right? That's a very, very, of course, important for Maimonides, right? And as he mentions, like specifically these disciplines, right? And unlike sewing and carpentry, this allows me to distinguish between true and false, right? This really allows me to like prepare my mind with how I'm looking at things, and by honing these faculties, right? These logical faculties, I then will be more equipped to study the more profound elements ultimately. So I think this also really focuses back to Harris's question, which is like there's a core that where you should be studying, and all that's going towards that goal. I should mention over here, because in a certain sense he's referencing the Seder Limud, right? And he talks about this in the Guide to the Perplexed. And we spoke about this a little with maybe 2 weeks ago, where I gave the example of the palace, right? The famous example in the guide. There's people that don't even know that they know there's a king. They have no idea where the palace is. And then there's people that are on the outer gardens, and the people that are by the wall, and there are people that are in the wall, all in the vestibule, and very few people are next to God himself. And the idea that Maimonides is giving is also that you can't jump into study the metaphysics, right? You can't jump into the Pardes, right? There's Pshat, Drash, Rar, Sod. You have to learn things in a certain order. and first you learn the aleph bet, and so on and so forth. However, what I did mention, which is, and again, before I learned the nistar, the hidden, I learned the nigleaned. That I would mention though that in today's generation, and this is not what the Rambam's talking about, obviously, this is just personally Chezi. I believe that while there's been a yeridat dorot, which a lessering of the generations, dwindling. How would you say that, Jacob? Yeridat dorot. Did we lose Jacob? We lost Jacob.
Got it.
Sorry, I wasn't listening. What did you say?
I said, how do you say yeridat dorot?
The descent of generations.
The descent of generations. So I would say,
in Judaism, we have this idea that each generation, because it is further away from Sinai, it is a lesser spiritual generation. Although I have to say, Rabbi Burton, who is a Maimonides expert, seems to really believe that Maimonides believes Yeridat HaDorot is caused simply by dispersal, not by being further away from.
So agreeing with that, with what Burton said, I believe also that it's true that as individuals there's been Yeridat HaDorot. I think as a collective there's been an Aliyat HaDor. And I would argue that what Maimonides talks about over here, right? He's basically saying, like, if you study mathematics and this and all these stuff, then the guide for the perplexed is relevant for you because you've just turned yourself into a perplexed person because you've taken on all this information. But most people at the time were playing with rubble. And so in today's day and age, right, when your child already studies biology, I would argue that, of course, you should have teach him the aleph bet. However, I don't think it requires now to wait as long. And we see this with the growth of Chassidut, of course, and like the idea that people used to not running around talking about Mashiach, but now they are. That slowly but surely the generation as a whole wants, needs, and expects to understand a deep, true Torah. They're no longer satisfied anymore with the surface level. And I think I gave this example of, and Rabbi Shirky talks about this a lot, which is, if this was like 500 years ago and you wanted someone to put on phylacteries, right? You'd say, the rabbi says you should put on phylacteries and like it's good, like it will give you a long, good life. And most Jews would just do that because that's sort of where the questions end. And today you have people saying, like, how does it relate to global warming? And how is it going to save the world? And how am I feeding the hungry? And like, it's not enough for me just because he said so. And what we have to remind ourselves that if we've gotten to a generation that now demands this, right? Then we need to show them how, well, in the phylacteries, aside from its shape that's already showing orientation, not locked in a loop, but rather has orientation upwards, also you have parchment inside. And the parchment inside talks about the people of Israel, the Israelites leaving Egypt, and redemption and freedom. And that idea that was told to the world is there to remind us that there is enough food in the world for everyone. And we have to stop thinking about hate. And putting on the phylacteries is the idea to be mindful of who the master of the universe is and what is very important. And we have to, those were answers that we didn't give people 500 years ago because the guy didn't know how to read necessarily. But today's day and age, I think we are in a place where we should not necessarily change the order of learning, but be more open to tweaks, changes, and expanding and teaching more of the nistar. Again, that's personally
this is where Jacob will mention his favorite metaphor or analogy